We'll get started. It's just after 12. Thank you for joining us, everybody. I know people are still filtering in, but yeah, welcome to the first installment of REAP's Energy Speaker Series for the fall of 2022. My name is Greg Stiegel. I am REAP's Operation Director and excited to bring you a great event today. I'd like to start with just a brief land acknowledgement. I am coming to you from REAP's office in downtown Anchorage, which is on the traditional and current lands of the Dena'ina people. And the REAP staff live and work throughout the entire state of Alaska. And we'd like to just acknowledge the thousands of years of stewardship that Native Alaskans have had over these lands. I'd like to invite everybody to join in and introduce yourselves using the chat function at the bottom of your screen and let us know which native lands you're coming from. As you select the chat function, make sure you're sending your chat to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see who's joining us today. If you're unsure of which native lands you're on, you can go to the link that's on the screen there, native-land.ca, and you should be able to easily identify which lands you're on. While folks are doing that, I'll just take care of a couple housekeeping items here. We have a couple presentations that we're going to be seeing here shortly, and then we will be having a good chunk of time for question and answer at the end. I'd like to encourage everybody to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. That's where we'll be collecting them, and we'll save most of them for the end. A couple of them might get answered during the event, so please do feel free to ask your questions as they pop up using that Q&A feature. Do not use the chat function if you can, and we'll be sure to get to as many of them as possible. Also, we are recording this webinar. I'll be emailing out a link to the recording tomorrow, and you're welcome to share that with anybody who you might feel would be interested. Oh, it looks like chat is disabled. So save your introductions for a minute. I'll finish my introduction here and then I'll try to enable the chat, but at least our Q&A feature is working. So sorry about that. And at this point, I usually do a brief REAP introduction. We do have a new video that we just put together, so I'm going to let this video roll to serve as our REAP introduction.
For thousands of years, Alaskans were intimately involved with how we produced and consumed energy. Though individuals in modern society have become increasingly removed from an understanding of where the energy that powers our lives comes from, energy remains at the core of everything we do. Alaska's relationship with energy is complex and ever-evolving.
Alaska's energy history is really centered around oil and gas. We discovered oil and gas early in statehood, and we have used the revenues from oil and gas to build infrastructure all across the state. But now is the time for transition, and we really need to be thinking about the future.
Alaskans have never received a hometown discount on the oil and gas the state produces. Instead, we pay some of the highest energy costs in the country. Investments to make our buildings more energy efficient are super important. And meanwhile, the cost of renewable energy continues to plummet, with wind and solar power some of the cheapest electricity now on the planet. We need to be able to produce and consume energy here in Alaska in a sustainable and affordable way so we can flourish as a state. We also need a state energy policy to create a predictable roadmap for the clean energy future that's going to keep Alaska competitive in a very fast-changing world.
There is not in Alaska an energy policy, which is really hard to understand. In a state that's as cold as ours, in a state that the health of our people is really wrapped around energy, there needs to be public policy on this.
Alaskans love our state and our way of life, but things are changing. Where we live, how we gather, and our global climate are all shifting at a rapid pace. Since 2004, REAP has been passionately advocating for renewable energy and energy efficiency, and educating the next generation of Alaskans to better understand where our energy comes from.
REAP was looking at the ways energy can be used efficiently, focusing on renewables, public policy, and ways that we can move ahead to make energy work for our people. You simply can't accomplish what we need to unless we work together. REAP is an example of that kind of organization.
REAP fills the gap by being the voice of advocacy for clean, renewable energy. They are the go-to organization in the state of Alaska for setting energy policy.
Supporters and members of REAP understand Alaska has a unique opportunity to develop clean energy, and REAP's leading the way in this energy transition. The most important part of that transition is going to be the people who operate and maintain and optimize these systems over time. So we're putting together the K through 12, workforce development, and university sectors so we can prepare Alaskans for the clean energy jobs of the 21st century.
Alaska has a really unique role moving into a renewable energy future because it really is going to be an energy revolution. And I think that what we see is Alaska is well positioned to do something really quite remarkable. We are one of the few places on the planet that has a full suite of renewables available to us.
Alaska is being recognized for our value in the nation and in the world. The attention is on the Arctic. And so that attention is on all of us, that we do the things that will help this planet, that will help our people. We can do this together.
By taking control of our energy destiny and developing a clean energy economy, Alaskans can keep hundreds of millions of energy dollars in our state's economy every year, create a 21st century workforce, and ensure energy independence for future generations. The world is changing, and Alaska can lead the way into the future. At REAP, we know that energy's everything, and we believe that Alaska's best days are ahead of us. Join us in creating a clean energy future and learn more at alaskarenewableenergy.org.
All right, thank you for listening to that. And I'd like to just wrap up here by thanking our sponsors for the fall speaker series. We've got Cook Inlet Regional Incorporated and the Northern Alaska Environmental Center, both sponsoring and helping to bring these events to you all free of charge. So thank you very much to those two. If you're interested in sponsoring, please feel free to reach out. We can figure something out to make space for you to sponsor this series as well. And I've got up here our next event is coming up 2 weeks from today, October 19th, where we will be discussing commercial property assessed clean energy in Anchorage and throughout Alaska. So be sure to tune in to that event. And with that, I'd like to introduce our two panelists today, and I'll stop sharing my screen. We've got a couple great presentations here to talk about small scale hydro in Southcentral Alaska. We'll be hearing from both Dave Brailey here and Joel Groves. Dave is a hydrologist who's been working in the field for over 25 years. He is the owner of Brailey Hydrologic, and he is a part owner of Ram Valley LLC, which has recently launched the newest small scale hydro project in Southcentral up at Juniper Creek, which you may have heard of. And Joel will be presenting first here. Joel is a professional engineer with Polarconsult and has been working in the hydroelectric field for many years. Both Joel and Dave sit on the Railbelt Reliability Council, which is a newly certificated electric reliability organization, which we have held events about in the past. Joel does a lot of work as a secretary for that, and Dave is his alternate. So good perspective on that front too. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Joel. So thanks a bunch.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, and thanks to REAP for inviting me to speak today, and thanks to all the listeners for joining in. I have a tremendous amount of ground I'm going to try and cover today. I think of this as skipping a rock across multiple ponds, each of which is deep and interesting and provocative. So with that caveat, I'm just going to dive in and see if we can get through all this. I guess step one is, will my slides advance? Hey, look at that, neato. Okay, quick overview of the presentation. I'm going to speak very briefly about who I am, who Polarconsult is, give a very brief primer on small hydropower, what it is, what it's not, talk about the resource potential for small hydro in Southcentral Alaska, and then talk about the barriers that currently exist to realizing that potential. So Polarconsult has been around for about 4 decades. We're a full service engineering consulting firm based out of Anchorage. We do specialize in hydropower and specifically small hydro. We have been developing small hydro, sort of from the cradle to the grave of hydro development, initial reconnaissance studies, through feasibility, design and permitting, construction management, in a few cases ownership, and then even coming in, on upgrades and ongoing studies and kind of that. So the full gauntlet of hydropower. Little bit of work on the rail belt, a lot of work out in the bush on the various village microgrids, developing hydropower for those resources. Blue dots on the map are all the communities over the past 4 decades where we've had projects, pretty well represented throughout the state. Myself, I wear a lot of hats. I'm a lifelong Alaskan, born in downtown Anchorage, raised in Spenard. Been originally an engineering intern in the late 1990s with Polarconsult, then a civil engineer starting in 2002. I'm a member of Fishhook Renewable Energy LLC, which is a venture set up to develop a 2 megawatt run-of-river hydro project up in Hatcher Pass, north of Palmer. Through my involvement with Fishhook, Fishhook is a member of one of the founding members of the Alaska Independent Power Producers Association, a nonprofit trade group that advocates for IPP interests. I currently serve as the president of APA. And then, as Greg mentioned, I'm one of the directors on the new Rail Belt Reliability Council, which just a couple of weeks ago was certificated by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska to be the electric reliability organization for the Rail Belt bulk electric system. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. And then just as a disclaimer, none of my comments today represent any of these various entities. I'm just speaking as Joel, the lifelong Alaskan. So I'm not representing the RRC, Polarconsult, Fishhook, or APA in my comments today. So we dive into it. Small hydro. Hydropower, hopefully folks understand, basically there's 2 general classes, storage or run-of-river. Storage projects are the ones folks always think about: big dam, big reservoir, you store power, you store water, run it through a project to generate power whenever you need it. Pretty neat. Run-of-river, on the other hand, does not have that big dam or that big reservoir. It diverts the instantaneous flow from a creek through the project works and generates power. So the key difference is you have no or minimal storage, and the power availability is use it or lose it. You can either put the water through the project or you can let it flow downstream. Distinction between small and large hydropower is pretty subjective. It depends on who's making the distinction. Today, we're going to call that dividing line 5 megawatts, depending on who's drawing the line. I've heard anywhere from 500 kilowatts on the lower end up to 50 megawatts on the upper end. But today we're going to run with 5 megawatts. A couple of pictures to put this into context. Here's a couple of storage projects. The top picture is Brailey Lake that most folks are familiar with. 120 megawatt installed capacity south of Homer on Kachemak Bay. Nice big dam, nice big reservoir. This is one of the major hydropower projects on the rail belt. Small storage hydro, lower picture is the dam on Chunisex Creek out in Atka in the Aleutians. It's a 270 kilowatt project. The reservoir behind that project affords the community about a week of storage, give or take, depending on the particulars. So big hydro, small hydro storage. These 2 pictures are big run-of-river and small run-of-river. Big run-of-river is the relatively new Forest Kerr project over in British Columbia. This is up in the mountains behind Southeast Alaska, 195 megawatts. And that is a big run-of-river hydro. What you see there is the intake and diversion structure with the river running over the weirs and downstream into a nice canyon. Small run-of-river, David Brailey will be talking about this one a little bit more. This is the new one up in Juniper Creek to the Eagle River Valley, 300 kilowatts. And what you see before you is the very small diversion structure, which just takes enough of the flow out of the creek to put it into a pipe and make power. So what is the small hydro resource potential in Southcentral Alaska? This map shows the existing catchment basins for the existing 6 hydro projects in Southcentral Alaska on the rail belt grid. Of interest today are the 3 very small projects up in the Anchorage and Matsu area. You have McRoberts Creek, east of Palmer. That's 100 kilowatts installed back in 1991. You have the South Fork Eagle River project, 1.1 megawatts that came online in 2013. And then you have Dave Brailey's relatively new Juniper Creek project, came online last year at 300 kilowatts. That's what we have today for small hydro. The other projects that you've seen, that you see on the screen, are you've got the Bradley Lake and Battle Creek diversion down in the south, 120 megawatts, Cooper Lake, 19.4 megawatts, and the new Eklutna project, circa 1955 at 40 megawatts. This is a very incomplete map of the resource potential. So we still have the same 6 blue projects or project catchment basins. I've added a smattering of various proposed additional projects in the region. Some of these have been proposed and are probably dead. Others are very much alive. Worth mentioning is Grant Lake in the middle. That's one that's being developed by Homer Electric or its affiliates. 5 megawatt storage project. I've got my Fishhook project is up at the upper end there in Hatcher Pass. I've got, there's a couple of other resources up there, so I call it 3 megawatts. Fishhook itself is only 2. And then there's a smattering of other projects, large and small, throughout the region. The small hydros identified on this map summed to about 30 megawatts, but the total practical build out of small hydro in Southcentral is around 100 megawatts. So you saw 30 megawatts on the previous map. There's another 70 megawatts of here, there, and elsewhere. Cumulatively, you're looking at about 40 to 60 projects, average installed capacity of about 2 megawatts each. That would get you to 100 megawatt. And those are, you know, in my humble opinion, as a practicing hydropower engineer in the state, technically, economically, and environmentally feasible projects, given the right circumstances. So this graph is an annual hydrograph of what a typical Southcentral hydropower project looks like. So the bottom axis is running from January through December, and this is power output through the seasons. So you've got about 4.5, 5 months of the summer at full output, 100 megawatts. And then through the winter season, you have diminishing output, has the available water in these various creeks would wind down through the winter season. And you typically see a late March, early April low flow and minimum power output of about 13 megawatts out of this 100 megawatt of prospective installed capacity. That would be firm year-round output, but much of this output would be dispatchable on a planning, you know, like a day ahead or longer planning horizon, because the creeks do have reliable and predictable flow components to them. Total power under the curve here on an annualized basis is about 438,000 megawatt hours. That's roughly equivalent to Bradley Lake, including the Battle Creek diversion, which is around 423 gigawatt hours or 1,000 megawatt hours. That's about 10% of the total rail belt load. So, gee, that's neat. What would this cost? So this is a provocative and speculative graph of hydropower cost. Bottom axis is installed capacity from 0 to 7 megawatts. Vertical axis is the unit cost, cost per installed kilowatt, running from 0 up to $35,000. And so the green circle is, you know, a hypothetical 2 megawatt project costing $10,000 a kilowatt, or $20 million. Which is in line with price history, and maybe you could get it down into $5,000 a kilowatt, which would be a $10 million project, and that'd be pretty cool. Developing a graph like this is really perilous because hydropower projects are incredibly site specific, and it's really hard to find the data and bring it all back to an apples to apples comparison. But this is some data that I've been able to compile over time that gives us some guidance of what this thing might cost. So boldly moving on, what's the bottom line? This is this 100 megawatt small hydro campaign is a $500 million to $1 billion capital X expenditure over many years. This would be a 20 to 30 year project, 10-year project, depending on how aggressively it was pursued. We're looking at 40 to 60 individual independent projects, 100 megawatt cumulative capacity, and like I said previously, 438,000 megawatt hours, about 10% of rail belt demand. Like, wow. So is this crazy? Apparently not. So if we look at this against the Dixon Fork expansion of Bradley Lake that's been proposed, it's actually quite similar. So folks may or may not be aware, but a FERC license amendment was initiated earlier this year by the Alaska Energy Authority to expand Bradley Lake to include a water diversion or independent development of the Dixon Fork of the Martin River. AEA has initiated the permitting and study process for this proposed project, and the public is paying for it now. If we look at the headline numbers of Dixon Fork and my small hydro campaign, Dixon Fork has been estimated to be a $400 to $600 million capital expenditure. As we saw previously, mine is something on the order of $500 million to $1 billion. Dixon Fork, it's a little bit vague what the installed capacity might be. It might just be a water diversion through Bradley. It might be an independent project. There might be power recovery. There's a lot of questions. It boiled down the numbers. Maybe it's a 50 megawatt capacity addition. As we saw, I'm looking at 100 megawatts. Dixon Fork, again, sifting through the numbers that have been publicly released to something on the order of a 235,000 megawatt hour energy addition to the rail belt. My small hydro campaign here, as we've seen, is about 430,000 megawatt hours, or about twice the additional energy output. So Dixon Fork would have some storage capacity, either putting more fuel into the gas tank of the existing Bradley infrastructure. There's talk of a dam raise at Bradley to increase capacity, or it might just be a standalone run-of-river over in the Martin River Basin. Small hydro, this is predominantly a run-of-river scheme. There'd probably be some of these projects that would have some storage, but it's predominantly a run-of-river proposal. So that's the small hydro resource. Looking at the time, I'm going to move on to barriers to small hydro. If we look at the history that we've seen, we've had 3 new small hydro projects on the rail belt, totaling 1.5 megawatts in 30 years. It's not really a solution to any of the problems we're facing or any of the places we want to go. It's more of a footnote that has very little relevance in the overall rail belt energy picture. Why is that? So there's 3 top level barriers that I've identified in my 15 years or so of chasing this small hydro rainbow. In summary, it's a need for regulatory reform. There's regulatory barriers to these projects. There's market barriers to these projects, and there's planning barriers to these projects. And I'm going to go through some brief examples of each of those to illustrate these problems. So regulatory reform. So my project, the Fishhook Hydro project, was started in about 2004 when we started looking at the resources and figuring out if there was a viable project there. We concluded that there was. In 2006, we applied for leases and permits from the Alaska Department of Natural Resources to develop the project. 16 years later today, we're still waiting for a decision on those permits. Now, Grant Lake Hydro, the one that I mentioned a little bit earlier, being developed by Homer Electric, has been on a similar development trajectory. It's on federal land, so it had to go get a FERC license, which takes a long time. They also have parts of their project that are on state land. They applied in 2021 for the exact same thing, leases and easements. They've already had a final decision issued in just over a year. They got it a couple years ago. So what gives? I have no idea. The takeaway message that Fishhook has is that government agencies are killing projects. They're picking winners and losers, and Alaska is closed to private sector business in this market sector. Bummer. So anyway, that's one example and one problem. Here's an example for market reform. Up in the interior, Delta Junction Renewable Resources proposed a 39 megawatt wind solar battery project earlier this year to sell power to Golden Valley Electric. Golden Valley, so this was a PURPA project, a QF filing. So that obligated Golden Valley to conduct an avoided cost study to figure out what the avoided cost profile for the project was. The study concluded that the energy value was as low as a negative 8 cents per kilowatt hour. What that means is Delta Junction would sell Golden Valley a kilowatt hour of energy and pay them 8 cents for the privilege of integrating that to the system. Not a good business model. So concurrently, that's sort of a, that's a data point. So concurrently, Golden Valley is profitably, or to the benefit of its ratepayers, operating its own 25 megawatt Eva Creek wind farm. It's been buying for over 10 years, 2 megawatts of wind power from Alaska Environmental Power at a rate of, I think, like 14 to 40 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on what the current generation portfolio and whatnot is. And it's also actively pursuing wind resource studies for future 60 to 100 megawatt wind projects that Golden Valley apparently believes are beneficial to the system. So you look at the little graph there, and you have 2 megawatts, 25 megawatts, and 60 to 100 megawatts that are all beneficial projects. And Delta Junction had the unfortunate capacity proposal of 39 megawatts, which has this peculiar negative value to the system. What gives? I have no idea. There's currently an RCA docket U22-029 that's investigating this question, and I'll hopefully get to the answer. So stay tuned. If you're interested, follow that docket. So planning reform. There's good news on this front. So as Greg mentioned, and as I mentioned, there's this new electric reliability organization, the Railbelt Reliability Council, which I'm a director, and Greg and Dave Brailey are both alternates. One of its new duties is going to be to conduct integrated resource planning for the entire rail belt. Integrated resource planning will answer provocative questions like, what's better for the rail belt, the Dixon Fork or this small hydro campaign? And lots of other important questions like that. So the RRC, Rail Belt Reliability Council, is a brand new organization. So we just got certificated. We're in the process of standing ourselves up, and we have a lot of work to do before we get to that integrated resource plan. It's probably several years away, but hopefully in the future and going forward, questions like that will have well-reasoned and well-defined answers. And with that, I'm going to try and save as much time as possible for Q&A. Covered a lot of ground. Thanks for listening, and I will turn it over to David Brailey.
Thanks, Joel. Appreciate that. I see a couple questions filtering in, so please keep asking questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those towards the end after Dave's presentation. Thanks.
Okay, Joel, if you can stop sharing, then I'll be able to start. There we go. All right, well, Joel, thanks a lot for that excellent presentation, and thanks also for all the heavy lifting that you've been doing together with other members on the Rail Belt Reliability Council. Joel is not paid to participate yet on the Rail Belt Reliability Council, and he's been doing an amazing amount of volunteer work over the past several years. So I just want to thank you for that. So this project, I'm going to go pretty quickly through this. I can see how to advance. Whoops. Yeah, so here today I'm just going to talk about what makes my project unique. As Joel mentioned, it's the Juniper Creek Hydroelectric project in Upper Eagle River Valley. In light of its uniqueness, why was it so hard for people to see its value, as evidenced by the fact that we were not able to get any loans or grants for this project, despite repeated applications to the Alaska Renewable Energy Grant Fund back when it had money in 2011, 2012, U.S. Department of Agriculture and other agencies. We couldn't get any endorsement for our project, which was required for various permits, including the municipality's conditional use and 4 variances from Title 21. The only organization that would endorse this project was the Susitna River Coalition. We had pretty strong local opposition, except for a few key supporters. And what I call the take it or leave it contract, which we ended up having to sign with Matanuska Electric Association, because we have no choice. You know, if you're a landed renewable resource generator like a hydro, we had no choice but to take MEA's contract, which required that we paid 100% of not only the project costs, but the costs of interconnection, integration, all of MEA's costs to get connected with us. And in exchange, MEA took 50% of our renewable energy credits, which now are going to be worth up to 5 cents per kilowatt, perhaps. And the contract also denied value for our capacity, which I'll get to later, reactive power, and of course, our zero emissions energy isn't worth anything compared to dirty energy from gas or coal. So this project is located, what makes it unique is it's located on private land in the municipality of Anchorage. It's about 1 mile downstream from the Eagle River Nature Center. It's located in a canyon where none of the neighbors can see or hear it. It's about 2,000 feet above sea level, and about, what is that, 19? It's about 1,500 feet above Eagle River. It's a run-of-river hydro, so there's no dam, there's no reservoir, there's no sediment trapped. This is a picture from I think August 10th of 2021, showing water bypassing the spillway on the right and that spring on the left. The photo on the right is looking downstream from below the spillway. And the next slide is just taken yesterday. This is how much water we're spilling right now. So it doesn't take away the creek at all. The creek flows at almost its normal level throughout the summer. And because the system doesn't trap any sediment, it is really 100% renewable. It would last forever with replacement of the generator and certain parts of the turbines. And there are hydros in Southeast Alaska that have been running for over 100 years. So it really is a clean, renewable resource. Another advantage, there's no fish in this creek as determined by the Department of Fish and Game. So it really doesn't affect the creek itself, fish habitat, and it doesn't affect downstream anadromous habitat on the Eagle River because it doesn't change any of the flow that reaches Eagle River in quality or quantity. The creek doesn't freeze in the winter, which is a great advantage for me, really makes this a uniquely valuable resource. And it hardly transports any sediment. I was trying to take a picture here of clear water, but the creek runs clear almost 365 days a year. So that means that this turbine runner you see here in the bottom right corner of the photo, that thing doesn't get hardly any wear. It should last 25 years under normal wear conditions, and hopefully this thing's going to last longer. So with that history, I want to review a little bit of the history of the project, which it took about 10 years to bring this online. And I bring up that number because I think any energy project, renewable or non-renewable, is going to take that long to bring online. So the speed at which we move forward is, or are moving forward is irreconcilable with our goals. But anyway, I'll get back to that. So 10 years ago in 2011, Siri got the contract for Fire Island Wind with Chugach Electric. They got 9.7 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, well, that was a start. In 2014, Matanuska Electric Association signed a contract with Hillcorp that include, as was typical, a 2% annual escalation in gas prices. And that's what you see here below is that contract. This is a page from the contract showing how the price went up per year. All right. Well, in 2016, as all utilities are required, they file their avoided cost is what we get paid for our power. They have, and the utilities are required to file every 5 years avoided cost projections. So in 2016, MEA's projection was that that avoided cost would reach 10 cents kilowatt hour by 2021. So that was looking reasonable enough for us, and we were about ready to pull the trigger and go. In 2018, what happened is in exchange for not reducing any of their gas take through 2028, Hillcorp and MEA reached a revision of that contract that lowered their escalation rate to 1%. So no longer were we having 2% escalation, and we're locked in at a constant gas burn rate through 2028. Notice that in comparison with the carbon reduction goals that are being discussed today. And here we are. This slide was from 2021, showing how the red line is the cost of cook inlet natural gas going up. The blue line is MEA's avoided cost going down in accordance or parallel with their fuel cost. So anyway, our project turned out to be, well, yeah, let's see. End of 2021, avoided cost is 0.74 cents. Last quarter, it was 0.72 cents. So we're making less than 3/4 of what we expected to make for revenue on this project. Well, what is avoided cost anyway? Well, it turns out in Alaska, it's pretty much just the cost of gas. Power here in the Rail Belt costs most of us about 20 cents per kilowatt hour. About 7 cents of that goes to pay to the entities like Hillcorp to pay for their gas. So there's a whole bunch of other unrecovered costs you can see in this picture that we as ratepayers, we pay a lot to deal with the problems caused by carbon emissions, which you can see in these pictures across the top there. In addition, we pay the government taxes that go to support the oil industry, as indicated by the arrow on the bottom there. and they also go to pay for all these problems caused by carbon emissions. So here the question I pose here, does avoided cost include capacity? Well, let me explain first that capacity is the cost of generation equipment. Utilities typically split their cost breakdowns into energy versus capacity. So in 2016 was the last time that MEA had to do a cost of service study. Their demand-related generation costs were over 5 cents per kilowatt hour for the new Acknowledgement gas plant. So that's basically, that is the cost of capacity, 5 cents or more per kilowatt hour. And the utilities charge their customers for capacity via demand charges. And the way our rate structures worked out, they can actually slide some of these demand-related costs back into the energy costs. Well, our laws here, which I've got highlighted in the top, a regulation state that rates must be based on cost of energy and capacity. Well, guess what? Unlike the lower 48, where wind and solar have guaranteed capacity value throughout much of the country, no renewable energy producer has ever been paid for capacity in the Alaska Rail Belt. Does Run a River have capacity value? This top graph here is the Juniper Creek's hydro energy production since we came online July of 2021. And the vertical lines that you see there are all outages. Except for there's maybe 2 lines in October 2021 when I accidentally bumped the system offline. But since November 2021, all those vertical lines, those are all shutdowns caused by MBA. Us being out of sync with MEA because a tree hit the line or what have you. But you can see that power production curve in general is very smooth decline throughout the winter, very predictable. Since June 6th of this year, we've been operating at a steady 300 to 315 kilowatts with none of those outages have been caused by us. So hydro, particularly ours, is very steady, very predictable. Compare that against solar power here. These graphs are from California, just illustrating that it's not, consistent. It's up and down. And for that reason, you need to have a backup. Obviously, the same thing goes for wind. You can't count on the wind always to blow. So you need to have backup power. And last slide here, because solar and wind are inherently unreliable, we need a way to store electrical power. And avoided fuel cost is not going to pay for the cost of battery storage or pumped hydro. So predictable power sources like hydro, tidal, and geothermal reduce the need for energy storage. These technologies provide capacity. The utilities and oil companies are happy to deny capacity value because it ensures that fossil fuels will always be needed to fill that gap. And like the lower 48, we need to start valuing renewable capacity, reactive power, which is something I haven't even talked about, and zero emissions. Thanks a lot, and I'll take your questions.
Thanks for that, Dave. Appreciate the quick run through there. There's obviously a lot of work going into this. So yeah, people feel free to ask some questions. I see that Joel has done a good job of answering a few in writing, so you can click over to the answered questions and you should be able to see his responses there. And let's see, we've got a few rolling in, so please do keep asking questions and we'll just click through them. I've got one here from Kyle Smith asking, who is proposing the Glacier Fork and Hunter Creek grid-tied hydro projects? Maybe Joel might have an answer to that. Well, I think you're still muted, Joel.
Okay, now I'm here, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Kyle. It's an interesting one. And I guess the short answer is I don't know, but I can speculate. So Glacier Fork, so far as I know, that I believe is the project that was proposed some years back on the Glacier Fork of the Connect River, a fairly ambitious 75 megawatt scheme with a dam and some tunnels and stuff that would produce power up there. I don't believe that project's been currently being advocated by anybody. I think it's dormant. That's everything I know about that one. Hunter Creek was being advocated by Acknowledgement Inc. And I don't know, so it's on Eklutna lands or lands that have been slated for conveyance to Eklutna under ANSCA. And I don't know that they are actively pursuing that project at this time.
Thanks, Joel. Here's another question from Jacob Powell. What would be your first priority bang for the buck policy changes at federal, state, and or rail belt level to increase viability of hydro?
Yeah, interesting question, Jacob. Am I allowed to say all of the above? So I think, so from a policy standpoint, I think that the biggest barrier right now is, a lot of the things that David Brailey talked about with regard to the market for power. If there was a viable market for hydropower, I think you would see a lot of entities start developing these projects. IPPs such as myself, such as Dave Brailey, such as others, that would start developing a lot of these individual small projects in parallel, and you would start to see my so-called, small hydro campaign lift off the ground and start to move forward. Until such a time as you see that sort of economic justification for the projects materialize, you're going to see the same anemic progress that we've seen for the past 30 years. Basically, you have this rare convergence of exceptional people and exceptional circumstances that occasionally coalesce that enable projects like Dave Brailey's to get realized. But you're not really making a meaningful impact with those individual projects. It's really just a footnote in the overall energy picture. So I think that's probably the most important thing to change that and really see this campaign lift off. If I'll serve my own self-interest and, point to the problems that I articulated with Fishhook, we wanted to develop that project in the early 2000s, and we've been waiting for those land authorizations for 16 years. Be nice to see that change. I don't know. I can't speak to why DNR has chosen to not advance those permits, only that they have effectively killed the project in so doing. So hope that answers your question.
Anything to add from your perspective, Dave?
Well, let's see. One thing that could, I think we need the financial backing, as my presentation indicated. It's that we're really at a disadvantage. Renewables being only paid for avoided fuel costs. I mean, that's ridiculous that there's no value for zero emissions. There's no value for these other things, capacity and reactive power and all the benefits that renewables bring. It's only worth the cost of the gas you don't burn. And that's just ridiculous. So I think we need change. We need change at the regulatory level. That's in regulation. That's how avoided cost is defined. Even though it's defined as the cost of energy and capacity, it's really just fuel cost. So that's got to change. To me, that's the number one thing.
Sure. Thank you. Well, let's see. Another question from Jacob here. Seems like small renewables get the short end of the stick from utilities versus the Hill Corp and others get. Is that primarily policy or bargaining power issue? Sort of touched on that in terms of policy hurdles, but any feedback on that one?
Right.
Yeah,
I would go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think it's both. I do think that, well, I don't know. I guess I'll just leave it at that. I think it's both, and let David chime in.
Yeah, I would point to the exploration tax credits that we gave the oil companies in Cook Inlet and the North Slope. I mean, $1.3 billion over the last year. I mean, and we paid for what, 35% of that Buccaneer jackup rig to drill in Cook Inlet. And I sure would like it if someone paid for 35% of my penstock, but it's just not there. And I don't know why. This was during a time frame when we applied for these grants, was right during the middle of the Susitna project, when there was tons of money being spent on renewable energy projects, but they wouldn't fund this one.
Thanks. There's an interesting question here from Steve Colt asking, has anyone suggested to seasonalize the capacity values? summer capacity considered separately from winter capacity. If we could seasonalize the operations of the thermal plants, could that fix some of the O&M be avoided?
Yeah, so there's yeah, thanks, Steve. I'll tackle that one. So absolutely, if we're looking at even just Run a River Hydro, that 100 megawatts of hypothetical output, that's basically firm capacity, like day ahead, week ahead, month ahead planning capacity through the summer season. So you could conceivably turn off something on the order of MEA's Eklutna generating station for the summer and run on hydro. I mean, there's other factors, and with regard to grid stability and spinning reserve and stuff like that. But the simple answer, I mean, that's what that resource could do. And you look at other jurisdictions. If you look at the IPP business model, like PJM, one of the grid authorities back on the East Coast, that runs from Kentucky up through Virginia and into Pennsylvania, something like that. They value capacity of intermittent resources based on their annual capacity factor. So wind typically is somewhere around 30%, hydro somewhere around 50%, solar somewhere around down there maybe 15%, something like that. And they value it based on that basis. Up here, there's no established mechanism for considering any capacity value of non-utility projects. That's an unwon, mostly unfought battle as of the here and now.
Thanks, Joel. Let's see, I think I see a couple questions in the chat. Steve Conkel's asking, which cooperative utility has the lowest avoided cost of power, and how fast is it projected to increase in the next 3 to 5 or 10 years? You guys, either of you know that?
I don't have those numbers. Joel, do you know?
Not definitively, no. I think Chugach may have the lowest on the rail belt, but I'm not really confident of that.
And then Emma Kramer here is asking, in regards to the need for regulatory change, are there any allies in the Senate or legislature or other nonprofits or lobbyists that have shown interest in this? Specifically hydro, I guess.
Lisa Murkowski has been a help. I must say that. Lisa came up, visited our project. She listened to all my complaints, and she's been an ally. She did move some things forward in the past year or two. Again, Lisa has sort of an all of the above philosophy when it comes to energy. And so, yeah, but she's definitely treated hydro as a small piece of the pie. Joel, do you know of others?
Nothing really immediately comes to mind. I mean, I know the governor, current governor Dunleavy has, I think he's fairly pro-renewable. Again, put on my official cat and our delays from DNR spans the past 4 governors. I mean, we have Palin, Parnell, Walker, and Dunleavy have failed to do anything to fix that problem. So I can't say that it really lands on Dunleavy's desk, but at the same time, he hasn't done anything to fix it. And our project has been stuck for decades as a result. So I don't know. Not sure how much of an answer that is.
Yeah, and it's hard to maybe pull out the hydro piece, because I think there is, REAP obviously does a fair bit of advocating for general policies, and things like the Rail Belt Reliability Council are putting a lot of effort into standing up an organization that can help plan for the use of small scale hydro, similarly to something like a Rail Belt portfolio standard legislation the governor introduced, would maybe twist the arm of some folks that would put this, but it's not specifically tailored towards small scale hydro. Let's see, a couple more questions here. Got 10 more minutes or so. Another one from Jacob. How much of the direct opposition to small scale hydro has been from conservation, environment, tribal groups versus concerned neighbors? I think you guys both touched a little bit on there, not being fish in certain rivers, but I think, yeah, maybe warrants a little more elaboration on kind of the conservation-oriented concerns of hydro and how to avoid those.
Yeah, so I can field that one at a general level. So usually with the small hydro stuff that I've been that I've been involved in, the developers are pursuing environmentally benign projects as much as they can. So when we see opposition to the projects, oftentimes it's just been in ignorance. They see hydro, they think dam project, and off they go in opposition. When we first started the Fishhook project, we got comments that had nothing to do with the Fishhook project that were more in line with, hey, let's throw a dam up on the Little Susitna River at the entrance to Hatcher Pass and turn Hatcher Pass into a reservoir. And they were opposed to that. It's like, well, yeah, sure. But that's not what we proposed. And as they got educated to what we were actually proposing, a lot of that opposition went away. The opposition that we do often see that persists is more of a NIMBY opposition. I don't want your project in my backyard. I don't like what I think your project will be, even when that is not what the project actually will be. Many of these hydro projects, especially these small hydro projects, the public facing footprint of the project is some new hiking trails, depending on the land status and the management protocols in place for whatever the project footprint is, and not really a lot else. They're very low impact. They're very low profile projects that most people don't even know that they're there. So once people understand that, I think there tends to be a lot of support for them, actually.
Yeah, and I actually did have I must say that I ended up getting I think 14 state, federal, and municipal permits for the project, and I found virtually all the agencies, including FERC, Municipality of Anchorage, Department of Fish and Game, Corps of Engineers, they were great to work with. I really had no trouble with any of my government permits at all. And a couple of neighbors are what made this project possible by granting access and easement through their properties. So virtually all the opposition, and I must also mention the Susitna River Coalition, which of course is strongly against the Susitna project, but they came out and were the only NGO to support this project. So I got to thank them for that. So really all the opposition that we had was neighbors, really. And neighbors that didn't want it, and really it's true that the reasons they had for opposing it were most of them were not relevant.
Would you say that now that it's up and running, they've sort of come around, or are there ongoing?
Absolutely, there's like been a 180 in particular. Some of the people that were most opposed are now our supporters. So that's really interesting.
Good. Thanks, Dave. Another question here. What is more sustainable for humans and the planet? Power storage in battery form or in water reservoir form? Is there any research on that matter? And then a follow-up, could Alaska, because of major amounts of natural rivers, mountains, and snowfall, sustain itself by relying on river power without dams, even though they're not as reliable? So I guess, yeah, just kind of interesting to maybe compare, we talk about storage, but yeah, what hydro storage means compared to battery storage. Any insight on that?
Yeah, interesting questions. So I guess sustainability would really depend on how you define it. I think, using hydro for power storage, I mean, so battery storage is evolving quickly, but I think it's still the most efficient means of storing power that we have at utility scale. Certainly a conventional reservoir is extremely efficient, and even pump storage, I think, where you have the round trip efficiency losses of pumping water up and then bringing it back to generate power, I think is still more efficient than chemical battery technologies. Although the chemical battery technologies are evolving quickly, so that may no longer be true. With regard to sustainability, boy, that's a really complicated question. I don't know if I could hazard an intelligent answer on that one. It all depends on your life cycle of what hydro resources you're developing and their environmental impacts. What's the life cycle dynamics of your battery? Is it lead acid batteries where you're recycling the primary chemicals? Is it something else? I have no idea. That's really complicated. Second part, could Alaska sustain itself basically using run-of-river power on a year-round basis without, as that being the solution, without any supplemental power source? I think the challenge that you'd have there is the turn down ratio that you saw in my graph, that 13% firm capacity out of 100 megawatts of installed capacity would generalize and scale fairly well. And if you didn't have, if you're expecting run-of-river to be your sole answer, the challenge that you would have is you'd have vast excess capacity in the summertime. So I mean, the wintertime is a period of peak demand, and to some extent that April time period is a period of peak demand, so it's so cold outside and so on. And so you have this vast excess of installed capacity that you'd have to pay for and either not use through those summer months or find some beneficial use for. So you've got hundreds of megawatts of summer power that you don't necessarily need, that you're going to have to do something with to make that kind of a venture economic. So I think hydro, or this run-of-river, small hydro campaign, whatever, is probably part of the overall solution, but it is not the answer. Would be my answer, I guess.
Joel, if I could interject, and Greg, you kind of posed as two options. It's either battery or not. The other energy storage technique that's been around since the 1960s is pump storage, which Joel, of course, was talking about. But pump storage has been used since the 60s to store excess nuclear power in Pennsylvania, a place called Mud Lake. When you have power not being used at night from a nuclear reactor, they pumped it uphill into a flat reservoir in Pennsylvania, and that's how that energy is stored for use the next day. And the reason that pump storage, another value it has in comparison to batteries, is that batteries can't save energy. We don't have the technology to store energy for more than a couple of weeks at utility scale. Pump storage, you can pump it up in the mountains and let it sit there for years and then use it later. And that's what's been proposed on the Kenai Peninsula with a couple of different pump storage projects, as well as in the Thunderbird drainage in Chugach State Park. So pumped water storage is a well-established way of storing electric power.
Thanks for that. We're just about out of time here. I don't see any more questions. If there's any more last minute questions, please get them in. But if I don't see any, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you to Joel and Dave for those informative presentations. If you guys do have more questions, feel free to reach out to me. I can see if Joel and Dave have contacts that they want to share in a follow-up email, but yeah, we can share those out if you want to follow up with anything. And like I said, I will be sending out a recording of this. I'll also send out a registration link for our next event coming up 2 weeks from today, talking about commercial property assessed clean energy in Anchorage and throughout the state. So yeah, any last comments from Dave and Joel would be welcomed. And yeah, thanks a bunch for joining us today. Right on. Well, we'll leave it at that. So thank you all and have a good rest of your afternoon. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.